I want you to picture two people. Both of them are sitting at their kitchen tables right now. Both of them are looking at their monthly expenses. Neither of them has started a war. Neither of them has invested in oil. Neither of them has any connection whatsoever to anything happening in the Middle East. The first person looks at their grocery bill and notices it's $340 this month. Last year it was $280. They look at their gas receipt, $72 to fill a tank that used to cost $54. They open their electric bill. Higher. They open their rent renewal. Higher. They sit there genuinely confused, running the same mental calculation over and over. I didn't change anything. So why does everything cost more? The second person is doing the same math. Same confusion. Same feeling of slowly being squeezed without understanding who is doing the squeezing. Neither of them will ever receive a bill that says war surcharge. Nobody will send them an invoice. No politician will stand at a podium and say we are charging you directly for this conflict. But both of these people, and you, sitting wherever you are right now, are paying a tax that was never voted on, never debated, and never announced. It's called the war tax. And in 2026, the Middle East conflict quietly put its hand in your pocket, and you probably didn't notice. Today I'm going to show you exactly how this works, why it specifically targets the middle class, and the 4 concrete steps that separate the people who come out of this period financially intact from the people who look back in 5 years and wonder where everything went. Let's start with the mechanism, because once you understand how the money actually moves, everything else makes sense. Here's what most people know: there's conflict in the Middle East. It's in the news. It's complicated. And somewhere in the back of their minds, they understand that oil comes from that region. Here's what most people don't know: you don't have to import a single barrel of Middle Eastern oil for that conflict to raise your gas prices. Not one barrel. Oil is a global commodity. It's priced on global markets. When there is geopolitical instability near the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's entire oil supply travels every single day, traders don't wait to see if anything actually happens. They price in the risk of what could happen. Within hours of a significant escalation in 2026, oil futures contracts moved. They moved because every major shipping company on Earth suddenly had to ask, is this route safe? Do we need to reroute around Africa, adding 2 weeks and $400,000 in additional fuel costs to a single container ship journey? The answer, for much of 2026, was yes. The Houthi attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea forced major carriers, Maersk, MSC, CMA CGM, to redirect thousands of vessels. The Suez Canal route, which handles roughly 12% of global trade, saw traffic drop by over 40% at certain points. Ships rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope at approximately 14 extra sailing days per round trip. And here is the number that nobody talked about on the news: every extra day of sailing costs money. Fuel costs, crew costs, port delay costs, insurance premium increases, because Lloyd's of London and every marine insurer on Earth raised their war risk premiums for vessels transiting the region. And every single dollar of that additional cost gets passed forward through the supply chain until it lands on a price tag in a store near you. This is shipping inflation. It's invisible. It shows up as supply chain pressures and quarterly earnings calls. It shows up as a slightly higher number on your grocery receipt. It shows up as your favorite brand suddenly being out of stock because the shipment is 3 weeks delayed. From January to March of 2026, the Drewry World Container Shipping Index, which tracks the cost of shipping a standard container across major trade routes, more than doubled. Shipping a standard 40-foot container from Shanghai to Los Angeles went from approximately $1,500 before the Red Sea disruptions to over $7,000 at the peak. That cost doesn't disappear. It compounds through every layer of the supply chain. And then there's oil itself. When Brent crude rises by $10 per barrel, which it did multiple times in 2026, the impact is not limited to your gas tank. Petroleum is an input cost in the production of 6,000 common products. Plastics, fertilizers, synthetic fabrics, pharmaceuticals. The bottle your shampoo comes in. The packaging around the food you buy. The asphalt on the road outside your house. When oil goes up, everything that required energy to produce, transport, or package goes up with it. This is the first layer of the war tax. It's invisible. It has no name on your bill. But it is real, it is measurable, and it came directly out of your purchasing power in 2026. Now here is where it gets more expensive. And more complicated. When a government goes to war, or supports a war, or positions military assets near a conflict zone, it spends money it does not have. The United States committed over $17 billion in military aid to its regional allies in 2026. Emergency supplemental funding packages were passed by Congress. Aircraft carriers were repositioned. Air defense systems were deployed. None of this is free. The government does not pay for this by raising taxes in real time. That would be politically unpopular and economically visible. Instead, it borrows. It issues treasury bonds. It adds to the national debt. And here is the mechanism most people completely miss. When the government borrows more money, it has to offer higher yields on those bonds to attract buyers. Higher bond yields mean higher interest rates flow through the entire economy: mortgages, car loans, business loans, credit cards. The Federal Reserve was already fighting inflation in 2026. Every additional dollar of government borrowing made that fight harder. Every additional dollar of borrowing put upward pressure on the interest rates that determine how much you pay to borrow money for anything. This is the second layer of the war tax. It doesn't arrive today. It arrives over the next 5 to 10 years as higher mortgage rates on your home purchase, as higher rates on the car loan you haven't taken out yet, as higher credit card interest on the balance you're carrying right now. The cost of today's conflict is being transferred, quietly and legally, onto the middle class of the next decade. You are prepaying a debt you never agreed to take on. The economists who study this call it the fiscal burden of conflict. It is the most predictable financial consequence of sustained military engagement in history. Every major conflict the United States has been involved in since World War II has followed this exact pattern: spend now, borrow now, inflate now, tax later. The people who recognize this pattern position themselves differently. The people who don't notice it fund the gap. Let me tell you what happened to markets in 2026, because the story is more nuanced than what you probably heard. When the conflict in Gaza escalated in October 2023 and continued through 2024, the initial market reaction was fear. The S&P 500 dipped. Global indices moved. Investors who watched their portfolios that week saw red on their screens and felt a familiar panic. But here's what happened next, and this is critical. The market recovered. Not because the conflict ended, it didn't. But because markets price in information quickly, and sophisticated investors understood something that retail investors typically don't: regional conflict of this type does not historically destroy broad market returns over time. It creates volatility. It does not create permanent loss for diversified investors. What it does create is a reallocation. Money moved, aggressively, into specific sectors. Defense contractors. Raytheon Technologies saw its stock price surge as orders for air defense systems multiplied. Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, all posted significant gains through 2026. These companies don't hope for conflict. But when conflict exists, they are positioned to profit from the government spending that follows. Oil companies. ExxonMobil, Chevron, and the major energy producers benefited directly from elevated crude prices. Their profit margins expanded as prices at the pump went up for consumers. Your additional cost at the gas station became, in a direct and measurable way, their additional revenue. This is not a moral statement. It is a financial map. And knowing where money flows during conflict is the difference between being a passive victim of these dynamics and being someone who understands the terrain. The people who panicked and sold their diversified portfolios in October and November of 2023 locked in losses. The people who stayed invested captured the subsequent recovery. The people who understood the sector rotation moved some exposure toward energy and defense. Not everything. Not recklessly. But enough to offset some of the war tax being collected from them at the gas station and the grocery store. So here's what you actually do. Not theory. Concrete steps. The first step is the emergency fund, and the math around it has changed. The traditional advice is 3 to 6 months of expenses. In a conflict-driven inflationary environment, that number needs to move towards 6 months at minimum. Here's why. Inflation erodes the purchasing power of cash, that much is well known. But a conflict environment specifically creates supply shocks, which means availability problems, not just price problems. A supply shock means the thing you need might not be available at any price for a period of time. An emergency fund in this environment isn't just financial protection, it's optionality. The person who has 6 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account can wait out a price spike, delay a major purchase, avoid panic decisions. The person who has 2 weeks of runway cannot. Keep this money liquid. Keep it in a high-yield savings account earning 4.5% to 5% rather than a checking account earning nothing. Conflict creates volatility. Volatility creates opportunity. Opportunity requires available capital. The second step is to lock in fixed rates wherever possible. If you have variable rate debt, a credit card balance, an adjustable rate mortgage, a variable business loan, the combination of government debt accumulation and persistent inflation makes this the wrong time to carry it. Interest rates during and after periods of significant government military spending have historically moved higher, not lower. Every dollar of variable rate debt you carry is a dollar with increasing cost attached to it. Refinancing to fixed rates isn't glamorous. It's not going to feel like you did something significant. But the person who converts their variable rate exposure to fixed rates before rates move further is the person who is not surprised in 2 years. The third step is to stay invested in diversified, broad market index funds and do not react to headlines. This is the hardest step because it requires doing nothing, and doing nothing feels dangerous when the news is frightening. But the data here is unambiguous. The investors who stayed invested through the Gulf War, through September 11th, through the Iraq War, through the Russian invasion of Ukraine, through every geopolitical crisis of the last 50 years. Those investors outperformed the investors who moved to cash and waited for clarity. Clarity never arrives on schedule. Markets recover before the situation resolves. The investors who waited for peace before reinvesting miss the recovery. Every time. If you are in low-cost index funds, S&P 500 index funds, total market funds, you already own exposure to the defense companies and energy companies benefiting from this environment. The index contains them. Your diversification has already taken care of this for you. You do not need to make active bets. You need to not panic sell the position you have. The fourth step is sector awareness without sector obsession. During conflict-driven inflationary periods, there are sectors that historically underperform. Consumer discretionary, the companies that sell things people buy when they have extra money, tends to compress. Retail, entertainment, luxury goods. When people are being squeezed by energy and food costs, discretionary spending contracts first. If you have heavy exposure to these sectors, this is the time to evaluate whether that allocation still makes sense for the next 2 years. The sectors with structural tailwinds in this environment are energy, defense, and domestic infrastructure, companies that benefit from either elevated commodity prices or increased government capital deployment. I am not telling you to abandon your diversified approach and speculate in defense stocks. I am telling you that if you do not own any energy exposure in your portfolio, you are leaving yourself economically exposed to energy price increases with no financial offset. Even a modest allocation to a broad energy ETF functions as a partial hedge against the gas prices that are extracting money from you every time you fill your tank. Here is what I want you to understand about the war tax, and why it matters more than any specific investment recommendation. The middle class does not have lobbyists. It does not have defense contracts. It does not own the shipping lines that charge more when routes get disrupted. It does not own the oil companies that profit when crude prices spike. It does not own the bond market that benefits from higher yields. The middle class pays the gas bill. The middle class pays the grocery bill. The middle class carries the mortgage at whatever rate the market sets. The middle class funds the government debt through future taxes and through the inflation that quietly erodes the purchasing power of every dollar they've saved. This is not a conspiracy. It is a system. And systems have rules. The people who understand the rules can position themselves differently. Not escape the system entirely, nobody escapes entirely, but navigate it with enough awareness to reduce the damage. The war tax is real. It was collected from you in 2026 in ways you probably didn't see labeled as such. It will continue to be collected for as long as the instability persists, and for years afterward through the fiscal consequences of the debt that was accumulated. You did not vote for it. You were not consulted about it. You cannot opt out of it entirely. But you can stop funding it passively. Emergency fund. Fixed rates. Stay invested. Sector awareness. 4 steps. Not complicated. Not heroic. Just the difference between the person who looks back on this period as something that happened to them, and the person who looks back on this period as something they navigated. That choice, and only that choice, is entirely yours.